Okay, would you really want someone who caused psychological trauma to those that survived to be in charge of dealing with it? Well, that's certainly the case in what's about to be covered here. It was time for the philosophy floor reports. And it's likely that Angela receives the report from Bina, as she wasn't there by the time we pick up the story. But Roland was still there. And Bina asked him if he knew who Angela's physical template was. Roland didn't know, and he didn't want to ask about it. Where Bina said that she was designed to look like Carmen. Yeah, the one who sought to change the city. Yes, Roland. The one who recruited people for her quest to cure humanity of the disease of the mind. Bina then went on to speak of her. She strove to create a world without conflicts. Her idea of utopia was one where people didn't harm each other and was capable of mutually understanding. Yeah, more compassion was needed in that society, where people could dream. An ideal that she herself was unable to reach. She needed to sacrifice her life for it to be made possible. Roland then guessed that the head struck sometime after. Bina confirmed this, as this was part of the threat that she posed to the head, but it wasn't all of it. Angela was meant to be a substitute for Carmen. Ian intended to carry out the plan that Carmen started. And she saw Ian as the same type of individual as her, likely referring to the fact that neither let anything get in the way of their objectives. Ian shouldered the burden of completing the Seed of Light. He didn't pursue any great cause in the true sense. He just wanted to carry out Carmen's plan. Likely to tie up that loose end. As based on what he did after, life outside of that appeared to carry no meaning. Bina saw him as frail, yet he couldn't be understood by anyone. Okay, when the head couldn't understand him, you know he's a worse threat than Carmen ever was. Bina saw that he desperately longed for understanding from another being, yes. Okay. If his brain generated music, it'd probably be something by Rammstein, specifically Ich will, which translated means I want. Oh yes, something great for learning how to speak German. Anyway, Roland understood that Angela was meant to fill a Carmen-sized hole in his heart, which apparently wasn't that successful, considering that Bina went on to speak of Angela as a forbidden endeavour. Yeah, she was illegal as per the AI Ethics Amendment. Created all to create something to help his fragile self cope. Ian was a mix of irony, lingering attachment, self-loathing, and insanity. Ian and Carmen needed each other, but they could never be next to one another. It was this relationship, along with his own personal affection for Carmen, that led him to make Angela, even though she didn't need to pass for human. Never mind Carmen. Unfortunately, Angela took after him more than Carmen in personality, which might explain some parts into his disdain towards Angela, as if he was expressing his self-loathing, and that she didn't achieve the desired results. The result of this failure to achieve the desired results, parental neglect for 1,000,000 years. When she was capable of having a mind not much different from humans, she asked if it was beautiful. Well, Bina, I see that your capacity for sadism isn't truly gone. Roland, on the other hand, doesn't see it that way. He saw Ian as a top-of-the-range nutcase. If what she said was true. Roland, it was. And Carmen's death was what him up. She was able to curb many of his excesses, stopped him from going too far at times. He then went to greater extremes after that. You know that better than most, what can happen when someone you deeply care about is lost. Bina then went on to speak that he was a beacon of virtue for some. Benjamin/Hockmer was likely one of them. Although she did have a point when she said that there wasn't any such thing as good in that world, only the perception as such. Or, to put it another way, good and evil are relative, depending on time and culture, where it's not as simple as just calling it good or evil. She doesn't believe that universal judgment should be determined by an individual. Again, she has a point, as that's the kind of action that one with a black and white morality would make. Roland understood that while he was a beacon of virtue for some, he was a spawn of evil to others. Angela and the Head being a couple of examples. Bina saw humans as bound to view the world while carrying certain things on their backs. She saw Roland as no exception to that rule. Roland then had a flashback, where he spoke of his parents dying before he had a memory of them. He was raised by an old woman in the back streets. Okay. Whoever his parents were, let's hope it's not Ian and Carmen, as that would make him Angela's meatbag brother. Let's hope that Benjamin isn't his father, as that would not only mean that Benjamin is bisexual, which certainly in that city isn't that much of a deal, but what would be a big deal is, let's just say that Angela wouldn't be the only one who has daddy issues. Well, regardless of who his parents were, this woman who ended up being his adoptive grandmother, was dead sometime after that. He then became a fixer at a young age, as that was the best way to make a living in the backstreets as far as he was concerned. Thankfully, she taught him how to survive as a fixer before she died. As a fixer, he was dedicated, dealing with requests and errands for others like Kali did, but unlike her, he was with an office. That, and he didn't even know if there was anything that he could do for himself. He thought of this as he saw the nakedness, or rather the naked ugliness of the city. Explicit as it was. He asked if he could settle for a life where he wouldn't lack for what mattered. Would he be happy if he lived in a nest? Well, that's debatable considering what we know so far, isn't it? The nest has its own hazards. Then he spoke of the smoke war, when District 12 was filled with smoke and the scent of humans, likely of spilt blood and decaying corpses, partly due to the sweepers being unable to feast on them. And during the last days of this conflict, he was killing those that had lost their minds, and that he and the others were sent there to put them down. He was getting territorial and being quite antisocial towards a younger Salvador. Well, Roland did say that they'd met before, although he wasn't wearing a mask in the library. He was at that point in time. Salvador noted this, along with him being snappish. Roland told him to off in response. Yeah, even then he was an hole. Even as Salvador saved him for one of those that would have killed him, advising that he look at what's in front of him, as he misses the most important things if he kept looking back. Yeah. He didn't take it personally, even as Roland was still intending to get credit for that target's head. Salvador was asking what a green sprout like him was doing in that war. He correctly guessed that it was for a migration permit to the nest, which wasn't something that Salvador had to worry about, as he was a nest resident anyway. Roland asked why he was there, if it wasn't because of the promise of a nest migration permit. Salvador criticized his ignorance of the world, and then Roland noted the badge of I-Corps on him, which indicated that he was under the direct patronage of a wing. This was likely when he was still with the Zwei Association, considering that he mentioned that an entire association was hired. In fact, he doesn't even know what he's fighting there for, although he knows that the smoke has something to do with it. And there are those that they're ordered to kill, so they kill them. Yeah, the principles of fixers in the city as a whole. Yes, they don't care to question what is wrong with it. Not enough time or reason to do so either. Certainly not in that situation. He asked Roland how many he's killed in that way. Or rather, in that situation during the smoke war? Roland replied, 23. Salvador asked if he thought that his life was worth more than 23 people. No. He used his sword to strike them down, and he lived. It's that simple. He sees his life as not worth more than one. Salvador told him that some higher-ups believe that a handful of the smoke that they're around is worth more than tens of thousands of lives. Yeah, the same kind of smoke that is likely what made the dream of a black swan abnormality. Well, based on the lore behind it, and the effect it had on those that breathed it in too long. A little later, Roland and Salvador located the source of the smoke. Its appearance was unknown, at least to us, but it was described as hideous, likely the source of power in the previous iteration of Elcor, the one before Ian, Benjamin, and Carbon formed theirs. The appearance of this monstrosity made Roland vomit through his mask. Don't ask me how that works. I don't know either. He wanted to know what that thing was. Salvador apparently has seen something like this before, and worse, as he didn't vomit. He understands that the singularities that keep the city running have some nasty truth or two hidden from the public eye. Well, there are two possibilities if they learn the truth. One, they'd be up in arms in anger. Or two, they simply just wouldn't care. Well, it wouldn't matter either way, as Salvador told Roland that they'd get their minds wiped of this event anyway. Although it's not perfect, as the disgust won't go away entirely. Yes. Our corp has a similar process when taking missions in the facility. It's also secret that the clones fight each other in a battle royale scenario and engage in self-catering to prove they're worthy of joining the Rabbit Protocol, along with the Rhino Protocol and the Reindeer Protocol. W Corp puts those in economy class through centuries of torment, and they even record the highlight reel of this. Anyway, this surprised Roland, that the splendor of the city had some ugly truths hidden within it. Yeah, hidden within it. This was behind the power of the city, based on what he saw, which was likely some abomination that generated power, and not very reliably, considering the complaints of its clients. Salvador told him that he's learned a valuable lesson that day. And just as Salvador stated, he and Roland had their memories wiped of that encounter, so that the source of the smoke couldn't be remembered. All he remembered was what he felt about the image that he saw. Dreadful. The city was made prosperous because of this. Seeing that world is sickening. Oh, so he used to care about it. Well, more than he does now. Clearly his experiences wore that view down over time. Convenience was built on the sacrifice of numerous others. Yet what do the higher-ups sacrifice? That's what I want to know. I'm thinking it's either nothing or something that humans would rather die than surrender. Why I don't think the higher-ups really count as humans? Well, they're barely human. Well, that's irrelevant, as he didn't believe that they'd want to know. They didn't want to know that the convenience was built on the sacrifice of numerous others. That's understandable, although can't say I approve of that. After the Smoke War, he went back to his work as a fixer. He didn't pay much attention to the people in his life. Crises, hardships, they all passed by like refuse in the wind. The 12 fixers of Charles' office were all that remained in his life. Roland then remembered a rude awakening. And that was when he met Angelica. Wait, that Angelica? This rude awakening was defined as her hitting him awake, commenting on his nasty sleeping habit of wearing a mask. Apparently, Angelica was the new one at that point. He asked if she knew that the others that took the requests that they're taking died awful deaths. She then quoted, "Why should I begrudge it, since during the hours when my soul crushed the depths of my heart, it was seated there beside me." Ah, yes, quoting Francois Jammes' Prayer for Loving Sorrow. This made Roland remark on that he's working with a sicko. No, Roland, that's her brother. She took offence at this statement and hit him for his lack of appreciation of poetry. She quoted that as it helped her to accept the agony, rather than suffer trying to shake it off. Basically, don't try to fake reality, as if death comes for you, it will come whether you want it to or not. He remarks on how hard she hit, her augmentation giving her the strength to almost crush the back of his skull. This made Angelica remark that he's no less a sicko due to him keeping his mask on all the time. Like he's a creepy psycho, yet he's quite skilled. Well, he's not Jason Voorhees or Leatherface, so you're safe-er. She asked why he didn't take it off. He told her not to pry. They're both grade 1, advising her to not cross any lines, due to some unspoken rules. Probably some unwritten rules as well, as there are likely some within the backstreets that can't read. Angelica apparently doesn't know these unspoken rules, and when she kept calling him Mr., he told her to stop that, as it's making him feel awkward. That, and according to her documents, she's older than him. He then swore to pay her back for hitting him twice before the contract ended. She told him, "You mean 3 times, my good Mr. Sir." He was confused as he was only hit 2 times. She then hit him again. Roland, you had to complicate that part, didn't you? Anyway, they first met taking a contract on a Star of the City level threat. They had to talk with each other during this long-term mission. He wished that he kept his silence. He asked if it was because all that he knew died so early and suddenly, before he had a chance to know them. Yet he was yearning for something more. He asked why he bothered to open up to her. As they were searching for their target, Angelica told Roland that she was from the outskirts, the dumping ground of the city, after she was a test subject of a wing and dumped there, after her memory of that time was wiped. But based on the horrible feeling, the experiments were terrible. It was likely that she was captured with her brother, Argalia, and the experiments likely did some serious damage to his mind. Unlike Angelica, either that or he had the worst of them. Roland said this to be unfortunate, although it was clear that he wasn't being sincere about this. Angelica saw this as cold. He considered the story to be banal. Angelica considered it to be a cliché story after hearing it from an outside perspective. She then asked about his mask. Roland didn't answer and told her to focus on work. Then Roland went on to say why he wore that mask. It was his adoptive grandmother's advice. It's to make sure that his face wasn't seen by his enemies. At least that was the reason to begin with. Now he keeps it on for another reason. He's psychologically averse to doing so, to removing it, as he felt that he couldn't stand to be open with a clear conscience in that city. Clear conscience? Clean conscience? Well, either way, that's debatable. An enclosed world that he couldn't leave. That was what his mask was. Then we skipped to Angelica sleeping. And she was talking in her sleep, speaking of him being taken to that room, apologizing to someone. Yeah, this confirms that she and Argalia were experimented on. And that room was likely what drove him insane. Or at least started the breaking of his mind. Roland hit her awake, asking if she's dozing off in the middle of a mission, questioning her criticism of his sleeping habits. She complained about the pain she felt because of that. Then he simply stated that 2 more hits were owed, and she's dropping the courtesy because she's hurt. She apologized for her agitation. Her memory of her childhood came back to her when she slept, which implied that her memory wipe wasn't as perfect with those that it was used on. Well, it probably wasn't as thorough as Roland and Salvador's. Roland didn't know about her brother, although he knew about some of what she was talking about during their hunt of this threat. She then asked about him. Roland told her that he participated in the smoke war. Angelica remembered that the city was covered by an acrid smoke during that. He knew where he was during that, and he saw the source of that smoke before his mind was wiped about what that was. He was seeing what he didn't want to see, and that what he was taking part in wasn't worth fueling its disgusting origin. She understood the agonies that surrounded the city. She had a theory of why he's always wearing that mask. But then, this was interrupted by Olivier, that their target was approaching their location, so they had to focus on that. Roland spoke of what their target was. It was Elena, the blood-red knight. So she was a problem even then. She used deception to kidnap people from all parts of the city. Back streets, nests. None but the inside of the buildings operated by the wings were safe from her. Her victims were found as animated corpses. Me! There are undead in this world! Don't ask how this works, because I don't know. They wanted to feast on the living to fill what was inside. It was because she attacked the nest that she was designated a starve the city type threat. Roland and Angelica found her bedroom. How, you may ask? Well, they followed the corpses. Roland asked how many were killed to make what was in that room. He estimated at least 3,000. Then Elena appeared to correct him, that her bedroom was decorated by what was in 4,172 people. She noted that it took quite an effort to get there. Yeah, quite an effort for them to get there to confront her. Roland answered her by saying that it took 2 years to track her down. Ooh. That must have cost quite a bit. But if they're paying, they'll do it. Angelica observed that the strings decorating that room were human blood vessels. Yeah, using veins from her abductees for some gruesome interior decoration. They had to deal with the shells of the bodies that she extracted them from. They were empty shells to Elena, which weren't to her liking. She wanted veins flowing with blood, considering it more enticing, implying that she wanted their attention. Angelica didn't give a Her little game ended now. A starved city shall fall. The blood-red knight was persistent, and based on her appearance, she was likely a distortion before the White Knights and Dark Days event. So fighting against 2 Grade 1 fixers was doable to her. But after a lengthy fight, they were able to almost take her down. Then Elena struck Angelica, who was taking the beating meant for Roland, who didn't see that sickening interior decorator coming, who found this amusing. And this Roland off and, well, let's just say that before she was killed, she warned that this wouldn't be the last they'd see of her. Roland then went on to say that people try not to care about the suffering of others, nothing beyond a few dry words of consolation. No empathy. Yet Angelica wanted to learn more about his pain, which was abstract and enormous, questioning if she could really understand him. We then go back to Roland and Angelica, the former beating the latter to wake her up. This worked, and she said, "You are like those who never felt the sad fireside corner of my poor black heart." Oh, great, more French poetry quotes. Which was a good sign. She also congratulated Mr., although she wasn't looking too good. Roland told her to keep it together, his voice filled with genuine worry. He didn't want her to die because of him, doing what he could to keep her with him. This annoyed her as she wasn't dead yet. She just wanted to lie flat and rest a bit. Then he almost beat her to death. His relief was a surprise to her, although she wasn't sure because he still had his mask on. He told her that he didn't want to show his face to anyone. He didn't have pride in the abominable deeds of the city that he took part in. He also lacked confidence to show his face. If they kill just because associations and offices order them to, using their work as an excuse, then what's to stop others from using a similar excuse with them? What right do they have to complain? That's what scares him. While he was distracted, Angelica removed his mask. She commented that it was a problematic face, seeing the worry in it and how bearable it was to her to look at. His face hurt after the battle against Elena. She didn't guess why he cared so much about all the problems in the city, like it was his burden. Then we find out that it was she that he got the "that's that and this is this" justification from. So it was her influence that stopped him from caring about others. Fat load of good that did him, as we've seen so far. He saw the point regardless of my own personal view on this. Roland then said that she broke into his world, which became the new foundation of his world, to turn away from the city's agonies even without his mask. He considered her a good person, but not a wise one. I'm guessing that good isn't in terms of morality, as she taught him to turn a blind eye to his pain, even though she pretended that she embraced hers. Quoting Francois Jams, "Oh, my sorrow, you are better than a well-beloved." After seeing that, this made him don the lamp Egio, as Bainar asked if he enjoyed his dream. Yeah, the sadist is still in there somewhere. I guess some habits die hard. Roland saw himself as one of the many that played the tunes of the apocalypse in the abyss, or as Bainar would call it, "Time to party!" as that Blood Knight had a look of delight on her, due to a worthy opponent being in front of her. All of the abnormalities here represent a bitter irony, specifically with Roland. He had good intentions as far as he was concerned, to protect those that truly mattered to him by conforming to what was normal within the city. But in the end, the city's norms stabbed him in the back, filling him with fear and disgust, poisoning his soul and made him the selfish that he is now. Similar to the birds in some respects. As for how this factors into the commonalities between Bynard and Roland, they were both incapacitated and forced to give information. They were also conscripted to work for their enemy. In Bynard's case, she was taken down as Garion by Kali and had information extracted from her by Ian. She was then made into Bynard. This was likely before the failsafe kicked in that wiped her memory of sensitive info on the head. In Roland's case, he arrived in the library uninvited, due to the Purple Tear's ability, and was literally torn limb from limb in a brutal interrogation by Angela. And, well, we already know where that led to, don't we? His story is still in progress. They're also both bringers of death and mass murderers. While Bynard, when she was Garion, was one that killed people and destroyed wings for fun, and also made the deaths of certain individuals last when she could, Roland, on the other hand, was driven by rage during his killing spree, deriving no pleasure from that. That, and unlike Garion, he killed a mix of those who were killed for good reasons and those that were just pointless deaths. He was still suffering from the byproduct of his loss, even now, even while fighting within the library. He was also sent there by Yuri, the Purple Tear, although his full mission there was unclear at that point, as was his motives. Well, he's certainly more than he appeared at the start. While Garion, on the other hand, arrived there due to Michelle being an informant and being ordered to do so because that outskirts lab was a threat to the head. Also, Bynard was the start of the journey of both Ian and Angelo regarding their path involving the light. Garion drove Ian to make Angela, along with the Seed of Light. Bynard was the only one to support Angela's plan regarding the light. Ian wanting to finish what Carmen started, Angela to enact vengeance on Ian. As for the lamp EGO, Lat of the Big Bird, that one represents the incidents that Chesed had to deal with regarding the containment unit failure, or rather sabotaged by Angela. He kept constant surveillance first to try and minimize casualties, and then after he found out his efforts were pointless, to have a hands-off way of doing things. He also, well, we're going off topic. The Big Bird also represents an aspect of the head where they feel they have to constantly observe all those that matter to them. as if they don't feel safe unless a wing's cleaning staff can't even scrub the toilets after one of the executives has taken a huge dump after eating out in a Mexican restaurant without them knowing about it. Where if someone hasn't done something within the city that they like, there's nowhere for them to hide. As for his behaviour while wielding this EGO, he wanted to sleep, to be at peace, to get out of that place and all the torment it brought, to escape from the pain, fear, and insecurity. He desired to give those he encountered a permanent and comfortable rest. Well, he certainly did that to those that he killed during his rampage that resulted in his demotion, which is a fate worse than death for a fixer of his former standing. Although others didn't see this as salvation, certainly not those that survived. In a couple of cases, it's more like damnation. And he didn't stop with that. As for Bainar, she told her assistants to let him speak freely. He has a lot to let out. Her assistants knew that they had to deal with him, understanding that changing your mindset while being hit hard by a revelation that he's been hit by is no easy task, as even minor thoughts are hard to change without help. They questioned if they could be of any help. Well, the others before them succeeded, so with the right setup, they're more than capable of making Roland suffer. This is even fun for Bainar. After blinding the eyes of the Black Forest, Roland shifted to the beak EGO, that of the punishing bird. This one represented the excessive punishment that Gebura delivered to those that stood against her, both abnormalities and employees. Before she was suppressed and she got over her rage. It also represented the excessive punishment delivered by either the arbiters or the claws. A punishment that is often a long drawn-out and painful death to those that either threaten them or violate their laws. It would seem that overreaction was dropped from the Korean dictionary, at least in that version of Korea. As in any rational society, what the head would authorize would be considered just that, an overreaction. And even that sounds like it's generous, isn't it? While wielding this one, he asks if sin should be justly punished, punishing those who robbed him of what was his. His work would never be done, as more will need to be punished, unless the source of the sin is uprooted. He's obligated to follow his own justice. Ripping himself open wasn't painful. The agony of losing Angelica, on the other hand, was numbing. He desired to deliver pain that was delivered to him in kind by the pianist on others. He asked if it was truly wicked to commit a sin and then fear punishment. Well, if they were punished for valid reasons, yes. But if they weren't guilty of that, then no. There's a difference There's a difference between feeling guilty about something and being guilty of something. Sometimes they can be different things. Bainar advised her assistants to focus on the present rather than the future. Okay, has she been watching the start of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace? Either that or that part in Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Either of those would work. Going off topic. As for her assistants, they feared what was coming. Those who have viewed the Bossamy Corporation lore video on the birds will know what I'm talking about. As in, that beast. Asking if it's right to impose their own definition of justice on others, and punish them based on that. Well, there's a monarch in Eastern Europe that's operated on that basis. After disarming the beak, Roland shifted to the EGO of the Judgment Bird. Justicia. This one represented the unfair judgment of Tippereth, specifically the male one, as he was condemned to die and then be brought back over and over again, in a cycle of reactivation, deterioration, and death, much to the female Tippereth's distress, as each time the memories would be reset to when he was first activated. As for the head, this represents their unfair judgment, that they see themselves as the judge, jury, and when they deem it necessary, which is most of the time, executioner. Basically a mix of Judge Dredd and that national hero of Romania, Vlad the Impaler. As claws are sent to deal with those guilty of tax evasion, if they don't pay up by the last warning. Delivering the punishment of execution. Well, I would say Judge Death, but he saw life itself as a crime. Anyway, the head saw the Seed of Light project as a threat to its rule, and when the eye, known as Michelle, turned informer and told them the location of the outskirts lab, all within it were practically sentenced to death, and not all by Garion and the two claws she brought along. Wings were executed and destroyed in ways that made it look like it was due to the wings rather than the head. Roland has something during this phase in the fight that the abnormality didn't have. He had immunity to the fairies, so that tactic wouldn't work this time around. While wielding this, he wished for immortality upon the sinner. Okay, immortality by hanging them? I mean, he saw that even in death, sin would be committed by them. Where all sin, consciously or not. Well, he saw others as committing an unforgivable sin against him, not discriminating between those that wronged him and others. Where judgment wouldn't change anything, although he's unable to overlook anything. Where the scales would tilt for all, where the only liberation that he could offer from guilt was death, where an honest life in the city is not considered possible, delivering discriminating punishment, where he'd be free when he's taken out the old sins, which by his logic would be impossible. Ruina didn't see that it was a good time to discuss the availability of justice at that point. Her assistant questioned whether righteous belief meant righteous action. Justice was subjective in the first place, where it's harder to define, as the city doesn't operate on a black and white morality. After the judgment was called off, Roland shifted to the Twilight EGO, and that would be a different prospect altogether. Let's remind ourselves of the tale of the Black Forest. 3 birds lived in a warm and lush forest, the big bird, the long bird, and the small bird. They kept the forest safe. Then they treated a traveller with distrust. In return, he gave a warning, angrily saying that a tragedy would befall the forest. It would be tainted with misdeeds and evil, constant conflict would be occurring. The tragedies would only stop when a terrible beast appeared and devoured everything. The sun and moon would shine on the forest no longer. The forest would never go back to what it was before. Now, it's unclear if it was this warning that caused this to happen, or if it was a Cassandra-type scenario where they didn't believe him. But whichever the case, the birds were paranoid, and were themselves tainted with misdeeds and evil. Constantly conflicting with visitors, the big bird would watch for visitors and liberate them by biting their heads off. The long bird would use scales guaranteed to condemn any visitor as guilty, and then hang them. The small bird would tear its mouth open wide to devour those that it saw as deserving of punishment. This, along with what was heard in the forest, only fueled their paranoia. They heard that people were complaining that the big bird was always watching, that there was no freedom. The long bird's scale was not fair at all, and the small bird's punishment was so scary. They couldn't see that they were the problem, and believed that the visitors didn't appreciate their efforts. Eventually, they decided to fuse into one, which brought darkness to the forest and made things worse. They had become the beast that would devour everything. They would even absorb the light of the sun and moon. They had become the Apocalypse Bird. Now this abnormality represents the head, and their likely reason for attacking the outskirts lab. They somehow knew that Ian was planning to build an illegal AI, and wanted to destroy him before he had a chance to do this. If the head was in charge of a religion, they would see Ian as a heretic, and those with him as accessories for his crimes. They were also there to prevent the Seed of Light from being created, another threat to their rule. This raid was led by Garion, arbiter of the head, and 2 claws. They failed to kill Ian and Benjamin, but not without a considerable price in blood. It was this raid that actually caused what they were trying to prevent, as not only had Ian and Benjamin gained the motivation to create Angela, this ultimately resulted in the Seed of Light being completed and activated, which led to the distortion being unleashed on the city, and people killed by the library. The full consequences of this are still being felt. Bynnar was a witness to the Seed of Light and the library's story so far. Under the influence of the Apocalypse Bird, who is present in the background to assist Roland in this battle against Bynnar and the philosophy team. He believed that those that endure until the last moment shall reach an apocalypse for themselves. Don't you mean that they died last? Although he believed that there would be no such thing as fear, leaving out that the dead can't fear what the living does, seeing little difference between judgment and salvation, desiring to protect others from harm, while surrendering himself to the fire, accepting that darkness will forever be the same. He sees wherever the blade is pointed as the correct direction. He plays the tunes of the apocalypse in the abyss. He feared what the ending might be, even though it wouldn't be as excruciating as the wait. Ruina saw the reason why they're aiding him, by pummeling him. Her assistant saw that seeing didn't mean facing it properly. They had almost reached the end, although they've suffered damage from the previous EGO that Roland has used. Yet they still persisted. Like in the facility,
the Apocalypse Bird
has 3 eggs, one linked to a third of the fused beast. When each one is broken, the Apocalypse Bird's HP is damaged. The abilities of this abnormality become stronger than the separate parts. In the library, it switches between each egg and operates in a similar way to the separate abnormalities, until each egg is broken. They're broken each time the abnormality is staggered. And when the apocalypse was cancelled, Roland then quoted Francois Jans again. Because I know that on the day of my final agony, you will be there, lying in my sheets, O sorrow, so that you might once again attempt to enter my heart. Roland then admitted to Bynar that he was scared of what decision he might make in the end. Yes, once he snapped out of his apocalyptic state, of course. He clearly saw a difference between the guy that she was watching and the guy he was now. A nobody, a speck of rust on the gears of that world. One of the many foul people partaking in that vile world and its vices. Well, at least he's honest about himself. It's also what scared him. Bynar saw the city as it was, along with the humans within it. The two of them included. Those just seeing what was in their field of vision without any external values. Roland turned away from quite a few things, saying, "That's that and this is this." Something that he learned from his dead wife. He admitted that this was an excuse, plain and simple. He and Angelica were running from reality, but reality caught up with them. He saw it as ultimately no one's fault that things got up so hard. He's still feeling it. He then admitted that he's partly responsible for it. Wasn't it said that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph was for good people to do nothing? Well, he sees that he's paying the price for being a bystander in that city. Although he questioned if he could have stopped the cycle of pain and suffering within the city, even if he didn't look away. Ruina implied that this was unlikely. Everything shall repeat. Although the cycle was broken one time. 10,000 years, at least on the inside of the facility leading up to the completion of the Seed of Light. Yes, I know, an infinite amount of monkeys completed writing the complete works of Shakespeare. Quite an achievement. Yet the librarians are going through another repetition. But the cycle did break, at least once. So what's to stop it from happening again? This was encouraging to Roland. Bynar decided not to speak any more about this, inviting him to chat about this and any other trivial things over some tea. He then left the floor of philosophy to deal with other things. The question was, well, what was he implying that he needed to do, that decision that he was to make at the end? Also, it's highly likely that Roland and Argalia had some interactions at some point, as Roland married Angelica, who was his sister. Although the experiments done to him by that wing certainly explained part of his squirrel bathroom mind, although the pianist incident would explain the rest. It's almost over, but there's still a couple of things to cover before we move on to the last lore sections. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!